Let's discuss the role of resistance training and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So before we get to actually deciding what we should be prescribing, let's see what the research says around the role of strength training and sports performance in the sport of BJJ. So the research is somewhat limited on the impacts of strength training and performance on the mat, but we do know that the literature points to a relationship between strength and performance in the sport. So we can see that stronger athletes tend to do better in competitive scenarios. Now, systematic review of research has shown that maximal strength, which is measured through 1-rep maxes or 1RMs, does discriminate between competition outcomes. So our winners, the people who do the best in competition, can be identified as stronger relative to the people that don't fare so well. Strength endurance of grip is something that we have to be really mindful of, and that has been well researched in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And anyone that has done BJJ knows that grip strength is a huge factor in performance. So there are two specific tests that have been used to measure strength endurance in BJJ athletes specifically, and both of them are actually done using a gi. So the first one is an isometric test, which measures a hang in full elbow flexion, so think like the top of a pull-up position. And the second test is a dynamic test, so it's max reps of chin-ups hanging onto the gi. So let's just say we go and we hang that gi up on the pull-up bar. We ask the athlete to perform the maximum repetitions of chin-ups. That is a common test that's been used with BJJ athletes. And what we can see in the results is that elite competitors versus non-elite competitors fare a lot better in terms of the strength endurance, both in the isometric and in the dynamic tests. So elite success is going to be tied to strong strength endurance of grip. Elite BJJ athletes also demonstrate great abdominal and upper body strength measured by sit-ups and push-ups typically in the research, and they also have excellent maximal isometric back strength. Finally, high intensity and lower volume training performed at loads of 85% plus of a 1RM has been shown to improve maximal strength, power, and local muscle endurance without interfering with BJJ athletes' ability to train in their sport, which is going to be an important point that we return to time and time again. In your class notes, I will have links to all of these studies, so you can go do a little bit further digging and research of your own. But that is a broad overview of what the science and the research says on strength characteristics for BJJ. We've reviewed the science. Now let's talk about what principles and experience say when it comes to resistance or strength training and BJJ. So while being the strongest athlete on the mat is not going to be the thing that determines your success, if I am facing an opponent and we both have equal skill level, I would always rather be the stronger person. Resistance training is a really important complement to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for a number of reasons, and when it's applied appropriately and volume and intensity are managed throughout the year, we can make sure that we avoid interference with their sport training. Reason number one that resistance training is so important is injury prevention. The neck, the shoulders, the knees, these are all areas that are prone to injury. So if we can make sure we have great movement patterns, strength, balance, all of these characteristics we can improve in the gym, it's going to lead to less injuries for our athletes. Reason number two is going to be strength and muscle endurance of the grip and of the core isometrically, as well as the ability to do repeated actions in pulling through the posterior chain with activities like bridging and through core and other activities in this full body grappling experience. Reason number three is going to be power. So decisive moments in a match are often determined not by just skill, but by the person that is stronger. So let's think about a takedown or a sweep. Oftentimes, the outcome can be 50-50 in who ends up being in a better position, and they are actually going to be determined by the person that's most capable of expressing power in that moment. So power and strength, the ability to express it, are really important characteristics. Finally, BJJ is a weight class sport. having a lower percentage of body fat and greater muscle mass relative to your opponents is going to be beneficial, but something we do need to keep in mind that we'll be returning to is that hypertrophy for the sake of hypertrophy is not the goal with your BJJ athletes. One last consideration when thinking about why strength and resistance training might be important for our BJJ athletes is flexibility. And while mobility work might not be part of a typical strength training protocol, it is something you may want to consider, especially for novice athletes who haven't yet had the exposure to training that may actually naturally develop flexibility. So you sometimes see in more experienced BJJ athletes, just by the virtue of time and training on the mat, they develop the flexibility and the mobility to get into the positions they need to. When we have a new trainee that has just started BJJ, sometimes they don't have that stuff. Yes, it may come with time, but they also may be at a higher risk of injury if they don't spend the time working on the mobility that they need off the mat. And we can circumvent some of those risks by making sure we give them some very targeted mobility work. So this is what the science and the principles and experience say about why we should do strength and conditioning for our BJJ athletes. In the next video, we're going to move on to implementing that resistance training.